Hi everyone, Erk Brook here for another episode of Erk Pod. It is Thursday the 1st of May 2025 and I normally don't date these episodes, but I'm going to date this one for a very interesting reason. It's just on 7 a.m. on Thursday the 1st of May. Yesterday afternoon, 30th of April, we had a massive amount of rain here in Newcastle. And it's absolutely fascinating to see the difference now compared to yesterday afternoon. So this is looking from the front steps of my house. And there's a little bit of water in the gutters closest to my car here. On the other side, there's basically no water in the gutters at all. As we'll see in a moment when I show you the footage of what I recorded during the storm yesterday afternoon, it was a totally different story. The car on the other side of the road, for instance, the water was basically up to just below the bottom of the car. It had got up that far on that side, and that side of the street, the gutters are usually cleaner than on this side of the street. Here, I actually moved my car back a little bit in the driveway because water was just coming up so far. And then if we look around, there's not much water in the gutters at all. The whole street was covered. Cars were driving up and down here, causing waves in all different directions. Some of them, as you'll see, were actually driving pretty close to the speed limit. It's a narrow street anyway, and it actually gets narrower further down, closer towards Newcastle. But it was just amazing that, just over 12 hours ago, this street was flooded, and now there's a little bit of water in the gutters, but not as much as there was, as we'll see from this footage. Now, you wouldn't want to come out here, but it was amazing to think that just over 12 hours ago there was actually a lot of water in this area. There's a little bit of water still in the gutter, and there's been some extra gunk that's around the place, but especially where I did have my car, actually moved my car closer to the garage, closer to camera left at some stage during the storm yesterday. But there was water all over here where I'm standing in my front yard, and it certainly wasn't helped by the cars zooming up and down here, some of them actually close to the speed limit. The water would just have enough time for the waves to go out, and then someone would come in the reverse direction. So I've actually moved location. I've moved next to Islington Park and the Islington Dog Park. I'm on the Ties Hill side, and behind me is Frosby Creek. It's one of the major creeks that ends up flowing into the Hunter River and then the Pacific Ocean. We can see that there's a fair bit of water in here that's not really moving much at the moment, but I dare say that this time yesterday afternoon there would have been a lot more water present than what there is now, about 7:30 in the morning on Thursday morning. In the dog park there is some evidence of some standing water, but not really that much considering the amount of rain that we had in this area yesterday afternoon. And it's fun to see that I can actually see some blue sky in the distance in the east, heading in the direction of the coast. So just a little bit of concept of what we're looking at for people who aren't necessarily familiar with this part of Newcastle. The old bridge there, I'm not too sure about the history of it, but the traffic on that road, that is Maitland Road, and it's obviously a major road that goes between Newcastle and Maitland. To the left-hand side is the Islington side of the bridge, and to the right we move in towards the suburb of Ties Hill. To actually call it a creek at this point might be a little bit on the generous side, because it's more of an open water stormwater canal rather than a creek. But I'm sure if you have a look on Google Maps far enough, and I might actually do that when we get back to the studio, to see how far this creek actually runs. And I'm pretty sure that somewhere upstream it is an actual creek. It just doesn't look like an open stormwater canal. So looking on the other side of the creek / canal, call it what you will, is another part of Islington Park as we scan around. Apart from it being a little bit cold, well, it is after all the 1st of May and coming into the Australian winter. It's a very big area here, the Islington Park, and this is just a small sample of it. In behind the trees we actually have the Newcastle campus of TAFE, which is an alternative for anyone outside of Australia. It's an alternative to university. You may, in American terms for instance, call it more of a community college rather than a university or a trade college, but that's basically what it is. It's a really nice area around here. There's lots of walking and cycling paths that you can enjoy, and if I didn't know any better, you wouldn't think, some doggos. If you didn't know any better, you would think that there was no rain here yesterday afternoon, that people in my street were actually moving their cars to higher ground. One of my neighbours had their car parked pretty much like I had mine parked. There was a slope down towards the street, and so they actually turned their car around during the storm to have the engine section of the of the car at the highest point of the driveway. Let's get in and head a little bit closer to the inner city Newcastle, and we'll go to one of the hot spots and see how that fared and how that's faring now. Before I go, it's just funny that there's a dog park, and it's one of several dog parks in and around the Newcastle area. So they put this fence to keep the dogs in while they're in the park. It's an off-leash area. And then you get down to where I was just filming, just on the banks of the creek here. And then the fence ends. So the dogs can do what the two dogs that just passed me did, go from one side of the fence, their side of the fence, to this side of the fence. And there's nothing keeping them in. When I was leaving the dog park, I saw a lady and her dog, and I was just making some small talk with her as I was leaving and she was entering. And she was telling me about being a local in the area and what she saw yesterday. So we talked off camera. And it was quite interesting, and I'm glad that I did, especially in this context. She was telling me that the creek that we just saw footage of, there was a massive series of waves coming down the creek, and there were people in surfboarding or at least paddling in the creek. And so she said that she'd been living in the area for quite some time and hadn't seen it that bad, that storm that bad that quickly. And the comparison that she made was with the Pasha Bulker storm quite a few years ago in Newcastle, where the Pasha Bulker run aground near Nobby's beach. There's actually a famous photo that I've seen, and that anyone in Newcastle seems to pull out at least once a year to put on their Facebook pages, where you would think that it was two different shots of the Pasha Bulker, and I think there was a golf course in front of it, but it's actually just one photo. And it obviously took some time to deground or to set the Pasha Bulker free. But the comparison was interesting, that the only other storm in recent memory that she could remember and compare yesterday to was the storm which happened over a longer period in Newcastle when the Pasha Bulker run aground near Nobby's. I'm standing next to Cottage Creek in Newcastle West. There is a little bit of water flowing through here at the moment, and I have seen with past experience how high the water can get. The water can get almost to the top of the concrete in previous experiences. And having seen the ferocity of the rain yesterday, I dare say that yesterday was no different. Like I said over at Throsby Creek, at this point, this really could be regarded as a stormwater canal rather than a creek. Cottage Creek flows from southern parts of the Newcastle area around Merriweather, for instance, and further beyond, before draining into the Hunter River. Looking at the Hunter River Bridge over Cottage Creek, I used to live a little bit further down Cottage Creek between Hunter Street and the Hunter River, and I have certainly seen the flood waters in this particular creek. I'll have a look when I get back to the studio, see if I can find some archival footage. While I can't say for certain how high the water was here yesterday, you can certainly see the stains of previous water levels on the concrete wall on the side of Cottage Creek. I'm at the intersection of King Street and Steele Street in Newcastle West, just near Market Town and also the infamous King Street Macca's. This intersection gets really flooded during heavy rain in Newcastle, and you know it's been a bad storm when a reporter from NBN News comes down here and does a live cross for the 6 p.m. news, as was the case yesterday afternoon. The NBN studio is quite close, nearby in Honeysuckle. At the moment, traffic's travelling along King Street, and you can see there's basically no water in the intersection. Yesterday afternoon, there was a lot of water in the intersection, as is normally the case with the bigger rainstorms here in Newcastle. If you want a gauge of how bad the storm was, just look on Facebook at the time, and no doubt you'll see some footage from this particular intersection. It's been over 12 hours since the storm yesterday afternoon. There's a lot of wind around, and there's also some clouds in the sky. They are predicting more rain today, combined with rain that we've already had over the last few days. But if you want some flooded action in the centre of Newcastle, this intersection here, Steel Street and King Street, it is certainly the spot where it usually happens. I've been a resident here of Newcastle now for 5 years, and there's probably been talk of upgrading the intersection and the drainage here, but it always seems to happen if the storm's big enough. There's a lot of construction in the area at the moment, and there's going to be even more construction over years to come. This area of Newcastle West is seen as a primary development location in the Newcastle West area. I'm not exactly sure where this part of the road surface came from, but it's ended up here on the footpath at the intersection, and it's certainly not light, that's for sure. Good comparison with the size of cars and buses that are going past here. This indicates to me the force of the water. It was probably loose to start with, but the force of the water, which has actually dragged it from somewhere else, either on the footpath or on the road itself, and has dragged it here. That was the force that we were dealing with yesterday afternoon. The rain started again, so it's time to head back to the studio. I'll give you some more information, some statistics, and also look at the archival footage. For the moment, at least, I've decided to park my car the opposite way to the way I had it parked yesterday. So the engine is on the highest part of the driveway. The rain will continue. Am I going to have another front row seat to a massive storm like I did yesterday afternoon? Let's see. in a way, it was quite ironic that what happened when it did happen, because the day before, I'm talking to you on Thursday, the storm was on Wednesday, but on Tuesday, I actually got my pressure washer out. Yes, I have a pressure washer now, and it was the first time that I'd actually used the pressure washer with an actual hose from an actual garden tap, rather than trying to use the washing machine tap in my apartment. When I was living in my apartment in Newcastle West, I actually purchased the pressure washer so I could pressure wash in my balcony. But on Tuesday was the first time I'd actually used it here at my place. So on the right hand side of this drain, I'd actually pressure washed and cleaned the gutter. First of all, I shoveled. There was a lot of dirt and grime and mud from recent rain that was in the gutters and has been in the gutters for some time, so I cleared that out with a shovel, and then I used the pressure washer. If I zoom in on this section, you can see the stones that was it part of the concrete pour when it was originally put in, whenever this gutter was put in. Prior to Tuesday, I couldn't actually see those stones. It was just black grime, dirt and mud. Compare that to the other side of this drain, and if I zoom in here, you can see some of the stones, but you can also see a lot of grime on the lower half of this gutter. Looking back at what happened yesterday afternoon and having a look at the weather, which brings you some interesting insights, but also it brings in an interesting way that the weather is mentioned and also measured. The Bureau of Meteorology typically works out rainfall from 9am to 9am. So for instance, the figures from 9am on Wednesday the 30th of April through to today as I'm recording this on Monday the 1st of April, that 24-hour period was 34.8 millimetres, and this figure of 38.4 millimetres was recorded at the weather station near Nobby's beach on the coast of Newcastle. So that figure may have been more where this was recorded, or it may not have been. But what it also does, it also skews the monthly rainfall figures as well. It would be a lot easier if they worked out and reported things like rainfall over the 24-hour period over the day rather than 9am to 9am. So with 38.4 millimetres falling from 9am Wednesday to 9am Thursday, what that also does, that throws those figures into May. Now, it's May 1st today. It's only lunchtime on May 1st as I'm recording this voiceover. And if you have a look at the stats for the weather, it already says we've had 38.4 millimetres of rain in May, which is not correct, because a lot of that rain came yesterday in the 30th of April. If I have a look back for the last 5 days of rainfall for Newcastle, and this might partly explain the amount of water that we're seeing now. On Sunday the 27th of April, 46.4 millimetres was recorded, followed by on Monday, 76.8 millimetres, and then 1.2 millimetres on Tuesday, 23 millimetres on Wednesday, and then the 38 millimetres for the period covering this video. And then if we have a look at what that does for the figures for April, 191 millimetres of rain in April 2025 based on the figures. While I'm continuing to talk about the figures, I'm going to show you some archival footage, mainly from the Cottage Creek area that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Money on the fridge, an old Erk Pod magnet. I've still got a couple of those somewhere, I think, but money on the fridge. Before we start, here's a couple of railway examples in the general area, just to show you that this is not a rare event and not necessarily restricted to the roads. This is near Cockle Creek Station, near Cockle Creek. Various angles here of what typically can happen when there's a lot of floodwater. There's Cockle Creek nearby, and there's also a lake as well. To show you this example, water can and does go over the tracks, and cameras have been installed since to help with the monitoring. There's lots of water in the lake on screen, and if we've got enough rain and there's enough water flow, it can go over the tracks. This is Sandgate, or was Sandgate, on the Hunter Valley line, and that goes over very, very quickly. So back to some weather figures to tell you how much rain we've had over the last 12 months. And the month of April actually recorded the highest rainfall for the entire month of 191 millimetres. Other high scores include January, which is during the middle of the Australian summer, 189.6 millimetres, and June last year of 180 millimetres. Other than that, it tends to be between 24.6 millimetres in December 2024 and then up to 83.8 millimetres in October 2024, with those peaks in June 2024, January 2025 and April 2025. Those figures courtesy of the Bureau of Meteorology and Weather Zone. With these images of Cottage Creek flowing into the Hunter River, at various stages we're seeing different weather events and also construction of nearby buildings either side of Honeysuckle Drive. These photos were from my balcony when I was living in an apartment in Newcastle West, where I was fortunate for a couple of years to have a uninterrupted view of the Hunter River. See old mate walking down the tram tracks there towards the Newcastle interchange, and how high the water actually is on that occasion. There's been lots of talk about flooding when it happens, and then it always seems to happen again at a later point. This image is from my meal room at work, and that is a construction site. I think they dug too far down onto the water table. These are cars in a storm a few years ago nearby in the Newcastle interchange on the Wickham side. There were lots of cars just parked there, as is normally the case, either people catching trains or people living in nearby apartments. And a similar sort of storm happened to the one that we saw earlier on, with lots of cars being inundated with water, not helped by cars driving through the water. We will have a part 2 of this particular story. The lady that I was mentioning a little bit earlier on, she was talking about that the storm that we had, that I'm referring to, was the biggest storm that she could remember since the Pasha Bulker. And I wasn't in Newcastle when the Pasha Bulker ran aground, and it was quite interesting when I got back to the Erk Pod studio to have a look and research, do some research on the Pasha Bulker and to see how big that storm was. And so on the next episode, on part 2 of this, we will have a look together and we will talk about the impact of the Pasha Bulker and how much bigger it was than the storm we saw yesterday as I'm recording this, or the one on screen at the moment. I was in Sydney at the time. We may have spoken about the Pasha Bulker incident on Erk Pod at the time. It was in 2007, 2009. So it was quite a few years ago. And in a couple of stories that I'll bring you on the next episode, I was talking earlier about a classic photo that was taken by a local photographer, as it turns out, of the Pasha Bulker, and how many people have thought that couldn't have happened. It must have been photoshopped. We'll hear from him on the next episode, and we'll also find out more about the Pasha Bulker storm. As I said, I wasn't necessarily here for it, but lots of people did come from in and around Newcastle and even from Sydney to come and have a look at the destruction, but more so to see the Pasha Bulker, how it ran aground near Nobby's. Sometimes it was amazing to watch these storms come in Newcastle. A lot of weather comes from the west and it sort of comes over. Sometimes it's sunny like this. This is actually what Cockle Creek looks like, with the railway line going over it. Cockle Creek Station is just on the other shoreline, behind the boat in this instance. So when you first go over Cockle Creek, you think, oh, that's a river. But at this end, it looks like a river, but it is still definitely known as Cockle Creek. On the next episode, we'll have a look at the Pasha Bulker, and we'll also have a look at a couple of news reports that I found in relation to the flooding that we experienced yesterday. As I'm recording this, in addition to that, the news report that I mentioned earlier from NBN News, that will give you a great look at what I was talking about from the corner of King Street and also Steel Street in Newcastle West near Market Town and the King Street Macca's. Some aftershots here of the two buildings. Anywho, I have been Simulated Erk. Thank you very much for watching. I haven't been Simulated Erk. This has been Eric Brook for Erk Pod. We'll see you next time. Ta-ta and farewell.